Maple Ridge, or you see Chilliwack hillsides, you think of that as urban sprawl. And what I started to think about recently is that's not our problem here. It's not our problem on the island. So I want to show you in this very brief presentation some issues that I think are our problem, which are actually worse than this kind of urban sprawl, which at least is dense to some extent. I've termed our problem island sprawl. These pictures you're going to see are not in the city of Nanaimo. They're not in a UCB. They're not in an urban containment boundary. They're outside an urban containment boundary. They're not even in a municipality. And the world is changing to the point where this kind of development is attractive. And people want to live in this kind of development. They're prepared to pay big money to live in this kind of development, which is great for the people that are living there. But there's big costs to society. Some of the costs are, as you can see, that we've had major retention of vegetation on this site. There are no services to this site. These sites are competing with development in the city. Most of these houses you're going to see here tonight could house a small third world village by themselves. And this is what I mean by containment of sprawl. These are all this is a 2-hour drive around Nanaimo, all outside the city, with new development, very, very low density. And it's not just the housing, this is the road standard. In fact, this is a pretty good example of the road standard. So yesterday in Errington, I was on a street that's a 10-kilometer road, followed by a 5-kilometer cul-de-sac. There's no services, there's no road standard. You as provincial taxpayers, everyone in the city of Nanaimo that's a provincial taxpayer is paying for road maintenance on these streets, as well as their own road maintenance. You can see the costs of providing services in this area, and I'm going to come back to a very good example, I think, for you of how that translates to your tax dollars. This is the Benson Views development just outside Nanaimo. You can see very, very large parcels, very, very low density, very, very limited services, in fact none, and the terrain speaks for itself. You notice the ancillary building, and one of the things council is struggling with internally, and this is why I want to put some context on the internal Nanaimo discussions. Many of these houses have ancillary businesses or buildings, which are going to be bed and breakfasts, etc. So without some regional context, it's almost impossible to do regulatory issues internally and level the playing field when these buildings have much lower costs, aren't paying DCCs, in some cases don't have to take out building permits. Aren't paying development cost charges towards covenant services. Thank you very much, Your Worship. None of these are in a UCB. This is one I particularly like because I do a lot of mountain biking, and 10 years ago I used to go down the Northwest Bay Main Line and you were in the woods. Those structures you see are on inside the gate on a logging road, miles from anywhere, nowhere near any services. If you want to talk about sustainability, you notice outdoor burning, which is something we don't allow in the city of Nanaimo. It's some of the issues around leveling the playing field. One of the things I want to point out, because this is only possible through the use of the internal combustion engine and vehicles. Every one of these houses, almost every one of these houses, has at least a 3-car garage, and usually ancillary outbuildings for the RV, the motorhome, the boat, et cetera, et cetera. Put this in as just one example. Those of you who have driven Highway 4A to Coombs, this is a massive building. I don't know its square footage, but it's massive. So to put this kind of commercial development on the Coombs Highway, you don't need to pay contributions to community services. you don't need to have even a building permit. You don't need sewer. You can't get water. And these people are competing with businesses in Nanaimo that have to do all of that stuff. And so we have this very unlevel playing field where we're in fact pushing people to outlying areas which are of agricultural value or which are perhaps forested, as opposed to containing those within just Nanaimo, but within the designated development areas. I love this picture because it kind of makes my point about vehicles. Three-car garages, three-car garages, three-car garages, outbuildings. Oh, you see the garages won't carry the RV, so it's actually outside. So I changed, as we were doing this 2-hour drive around, I saw this street, Paradise Place, and it reminded me of the song. But I had to change the song to, we took Paradise and cut down the trees and put up huge houses on extremely large lots, which we drive miles to in our single occupancy vehicles, a long way from any services, with no sewer and unregulated water consumption, in non-diverse, homogeneous neighborhoods, so we can avoid paying our share of shared community services. That's what I mean by urban sprawl, or as I've characterized it, island sprawl. And when I talk about the complex nature and how this affects your taxes and environment and everything that we do, when we were doing this drive, we happened across a service provider, and it was this one. And it's interesting, I don't know the demographics of these houses, these 3, 4, 5, 6,000 square foot houses, but I suspect they're my age or older. I don't expect they're 22-year-olds trying to find housing. And the demographic of that group means that as they age, they're going to put more and more demands on the healthcare services. So the reality is, I don't know, on some nights there's maybe 2, 3 ambulances available in the city of Nanaimo. When these people have to drive, when there's an emergency call and the ambulance goes 3, 5, 10 kilometers off into the boonies to deal with these houses, those services aren't available to other members. So that's just one example of the practical application of extreme low density. It spreads our services very thin, it's very uneconomic, and in some cases could literally be life-threatening. So my view is that our current approach is environmentally unsustainable, it's financially unsustainable, it's socially unsustainable. So what do we do about it? And the key issue for you is that land use planning plays a critical role in influencing spatial patterns, character, and livability of a community. It's the most significant factor in becoming a complete community. So until we deal with that, we can ply more money into transit. We'll still have a lousy transit system on a model that can't possibly cope because of low density. If we try to send fire trucks to extreme low density, it'll cost us a lot more money. If we allow people to live outside and not pay their fair share of community services, there's multi-million-dollar houses in Nanaimo, multi-million, that don't pay anything for recreation, don't pay anything for police. And how is that sustainable? How is it fair? So growth management is something that we absolutely have to get a handle on. And this is different than stopping growth. It's not about stopping growth in any way. In fact, from an economic point of view, a huge part of the Nanaimo economy is based on building housing. But there's a smart way to do it and there's a dumb way to do it. And in my opinion, on our current land use plans, it's very inefficient, i.e. dumb. That affects your taxes. One of the reasons to live in a great big house miles from anywhere outside is not only the ambiance, but guess what? You can avoid paying taxes towards community services. You can have somebody else pay. In addition, this is the social connection. If you all go at the extreme sense and live in a planned walled community, you pay your charges inside. You don't care what's happening on the street. You don't care about, you don't want to pay for recreation or kids programs or policing, etc. So we get more and more of a divided society. And another issue that's quite insidious is we have less and less community involvement. A book I recommend to you is this book, Bowling Alone by Robert Putnam, where he talks about, in an American context, the increasing civic disengagement that we see. And he postulates on a variety of the reasons, but one of them up there you'll see in the corner is sprawl. and particularly homogeneous sprawl being connected in a demonstrable way with lack of involvement. So what about solutions? Here's my friend Albert saying insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. I hear people, I actually heard the argument a couple of weeks ago that in the case of the Cable Bay development, oh well, without a golf course, they won't build out there, it'll all be fine, it'll stay the same. I'm here to tell you that will not happen. There will be multi-million-dollar houses out there on large lots. Take you back to some of these examples. Is that preferable to the other models is the only question for you. This is not right or wrong. It's not bad or good. It's about choices. So I thought I'd put this up because I kind of had a little bit of insight myself about the discussion that Council's dealing with around UCBs and context and why we get to this recommendation of just going to the boundary. So this is the city of Nanaimo. The green is the city boundary, and the yellow is those areas that are outside an urban containment boundary. So you can see that relative to the city, all this machinations and gnashing of teeth is about what amounts to a very small portion of land. That doesn't mean that it's not important to the people adjacent there, but in the context of the city, the part of land that we're trying to preserve in the UCB right now is relatively minor. And I want to put that in context. This block here is not under discussion about a UCB. This stripped block is the Landsville Foothills development entirely within the development of Landsville. So that's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of lots right adjacent to the city, which apparently isn't a discussion topic around UCBs. It's happening, it's going to happen, it's underway, we're helping with servicing, in fact. That's within a municipality. The examples I showed you are largely from outside of municipalities. So that's the contextual issue. So I want to show you in this slide the reason why we're recommending the city boundary in terms of context. So back to what I was saying before, these small areas on the edge of the city are what we're having this big discussion about right now with the UCB. Just in the case of Landsville, not talking about the rest of the region, not talking about Parksville, Qualicum, this is the area that's currently under development and not in discussion under the UCB. All of this area, and in fact the Benson View developments outside the city where I was showing you the very large blocks, none of that's under discussion in UCB. So a large part of the discussion I hear in the UCB discussion is, well, the line is the line is the line. And what I'm suggesting is you can't have that discussion in the city without some context of what's happening outside. We're sitting here basically fiddling while Rome burns in the city. Outside, any number of things are happening, including development without building inspections, et cetera. So I think in terms of our urban containment boundary, that's contextual just with our neighboring municipality, let alone the larger issue, which is outside of any municipality or any UCB. That's the example I showed you. Again, Albert's saying you can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created those problems. So we have a couple of options in terms of addressing solutions. If you accept that the approach that we're taking right now is environmentally, financially, and socially unsustainable, then we have to make some changes. And in particular, our argument is that we have to push density into the cities, the municipal areas, and we have to protect those areas outside that are capable of still being protected, particularly forested areas, environmentally sensitive areas. And there are a couple of options which to date, the city of Nanaimo has not exerted significantly at the region. One of them, I'm calling rezoning ban. We can rezone. The fact that our current rules of the day were set in the 1970s and bear no relation to current expectations means you can change them. People won't like it. People will be infuriated, but it is not true that you cannot change the zoning on lands. And if, in fact, we want to protect these lands outside the city from the kind of development that is extremely expensive or extremely costly in an environmental point of view, there are tools. The other tool, actually, that's is intended to be regulations. I'm ahead of myself. The other tool is downzoning, which I've just spoken to. So let's go back to regulation man. The other issue is leveling the playing field. Rather than telling people they can't develop, what we need to get onto at the region in a very rapid fashion is saying, sure, you can develop on your property if we don't downzone it, but you have to pay the same costs societally that other people are paying. Because otherwise, we'd rather have you in a municipality paying those costs towards cared services. So we need to take steps at the region in saying we are going to level the playing field, and it's no longer acceptable to be able to build outside without cost of services contributions, or without building permits, or without the same kind of regulations as exist. I showed the example of outdoor burning. Nanaimo has long ago accepted that that's a public health problem. And outside the city, it's never been dealt with. We need to start taking stance on those kinds of issues. That won't be easy, as council knows. The region theoretically would work with everybody rowing together. It's much more of a scrum, and there are a lot of pissing wars. But the argument here to our council is that if we're going to have pissing wars anyway, we at least should work on what's in the best interest of the city of Nanaimo taxpayers, and that regionally, increasingly, that's going to mean leveling the playing field and perhaps downzoning lands outside the city. I stole these graphics from the regional district. You notice the region's talking about economy, society, and environment. If that is going to be addressed, then the answer is in changing the status quo, leveling the playing field with municipal taxpayers. That's not just City of Nanaimo taxpayers, but Lanceville and Parksville, Qualicum. Downzoning to protect natural areas, and densifying within incorporated municipalities. So this comes to why we're recommending to go to the city boundary. So there's a very famous battle that Julius Caesar fought in Gaul, where he surrounded the Gauls in Alesia, and they built ramparts around the town. So this people that were being besieged were actually surrounded by a structure called circumvallation. That's what we're talking about here. These are all artificial lines anyway. The reason we're talking about the city boundary now is not to expand development within the city of Nanaimo so much as to set a defensible line to stop development outside the municipal areas for environmental, social, and cultural reasons. And it happens that the city boundary tends to be the boundary that is best defensible. And that leads to our recommendation this evening. So, part of this discussion is about choices. I like to mountain bike, I like to be in the outdoors, I've been on Vancouver Island all my life. I would actually prefer the areas to be treed. But lots of areas that were treed until a couple of years ago, or are still treed and won't be treed next week, have existing zoning on them. They're going to be developed. Council isn't going to downzone them. So the choice is, what's the format? And one of the things that density provides is the density provides the opportunity to provide common green space. It provides the opportunity to provide common and shared services. It provides economies of scale. It provides for varied housing types and diversity. And it allows for less reliance on the auto. One of the things I didn't mention in many of those developments that you saw in the pictures is you can't get a jug of milk without driving miles and miles and miles. There is no community base, so we're totally reliant on the auto. So that's the one option. If you can't have the option of keeping the trees, which I might prefer, then we have to get on to density. In our mindset, this happens to be at Fairwind. We think this kind of density around green space is preferable to the alternative, which we see not as protecting the status quo, but this. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Mr. Berry. That's certainly alarming and a lot for us to contemplate the implications with not only our own community and the debate that's ongoing through the Plan Nanaimo Advisory Committee and urban containment boundary adjustments and proposed projects that are under review, but also our relationship with our fellow municipalities of Lanceville, Parksville, and Qualicum Beach, and our erstwhile rural neighbors in the electoral areas.